I like to always approach the story without an idea of what it will be. Like, I love to leave a lot of room for the story to shape itself. So I allow a lot of space for the interviews and the research to help me build an idea of what I will write about. And I think there has to be a level of trust, of certainty that it'll come.
Welcome to the Nieman Storyboard Podcast, where we dig into the craft of journalism and storytelling. I'm Mark Armstrong, editor of Nieman Storyboard. This show is brought to you by the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard. You can get updates by signing up for our newsletter. Just go to niemanstoryboard.org to sign up. Today, I'm once again joined by Storyboard contributor Christina M. Tapper. Hello, Christina.
Hey, Mark, what's going on?
It's so great to have you here again, and you have a wonderful guest for us today. Can you tell us about her?
Sure. I had a very rich conversation with Sasha Bonét, who is a writer and cultural critic. Her criticism and essays have appeared in the Paris Review, Aperture, New York Magazine, Vogue, among other publications. And she's written about the work of artists like Carrie Mae Weems, Lorna Simpson, and Dawood Bey. Sasha is also a professor of creative writing at Columbia University and Barnard College. And for our conversation today, we talked about her recently published book, The Water Bearers. It's a memoir of mothers and daughters. And this intergenerational story is striking, but so is the context and the organization of the book and the ways in which Sasha attempts to make sense of the lives of the women in her family and how their experiences and their choices shape the way she lives and mothers her own daughter. Readers will get to know Sasha's grandmother, Betty Jean, the matriarch, who left a cotton plantation in Louisiana and moved to Houston and raised 11 children. Readers will also get to know about notable women like funk singer-songwriter Betty Davis, and also learn about women like Iberia Hampton, the mother of Black Panther activist and revolutionary Fred Hampton. This book has many themes, and what emerges are themes like water, freedom, place, and placelessness, and what it means to be chosen or not, but also what it means to be the one choosing.
Yeah, would you call this book like a reported memoir? There are so many different threads that she explores in this book.
I would. I mean, obviously, Sasha is telling the story of her own life, her family's legacy, and the reporting goes into her interviews with her mother, her aunts, even her grandmother, and also pulling in some of her research and reporting when she's contextualizing and giving more of a historical view on motherhood and womanhood as she is breaking that down in the parts of the book in which she calls tributaries, which are kind of these mini chapters on notable but unsung Black women.
And how did you first discover her work?
So I first came to Sasha's work back in 2019 when she wrote a story for the now shuttered digital publication Topic about the influential artist Camille Billups, who gave up her daughter when her daughter was 4 years old. That story really stayed with me ever since. And Sasha writes about Camille in the book too.
Yeah, I should note also that essay was on a lot of best of the year lists, including long reads for notable essays of 2019. Well, it's a wonderful conversation, and I'm excited to share it. So without further ado, here is Christina's conversation with Sasha Bonét.
Sasha Bonét, welcome to the Nieman Storyboard Podcast. I'm so delighted to be in conversation with you, and congrats on your memoir, The Water Bearers.
Hi, Christina. Thank you so much for having me. What an honor to be here.
Of course, of course. So the book covers a lot of personal and intimate family history and legacy, especially of your grandmother, Betty Jean. So tell us, at the heart of it, what is The Water Bearers about?
At the heart of it, it's a family story. It's really an American family story. And in the Black American family, oftentimes it is a matriarchal family. And that kind of queers the traditional American setup that we understand, which is that the man is at the head of the household. And so this is kind of a telling of the American experience from the perspective of Black women. So it's going through my family lineage, but it's also connecting to different policies and histories that impact the way the Black family is structured, the intimacies of the Black family. And I have it divided into 3 sections where it starts with my grandmother's generation, who came from Louisiana, worked as a cotton tenant, and then she migrated during the Great Migration. So then she had my mother in Houston, who was a part of integration and affirmative action and the civil rights movement. And then there's me, who's this millennial raised in white suburbia by a mother who is desperately trying to attain the American dream. And so each generation has so much rich history that impacted the ways that these women lived and the ways that these women raised their children, the ways they existed in the world. So I really wanted to look at American history through the lens of the women that helped to really birth this nation from the beginning of the empire, to understand an alternative view, an alternative viewpoint from the people who are often kind of disregarded, and get at a kind of deeper texture of what this nation is and what it has been and what it has the potential to be. And I thought I could use my family to kind of go through these historical markers. So it's deeply intimate about one family, but it can be applied to so many different families of all different races within the American fabric.
You talked a little bit about how you've structured the book, and along with my career in journalism and media, I'm also a visual artist, and so I collage. And I know you do too, and we'll talk about that. But when I was reading The Water Bearers, I see your book as a collage in all of its details and complexities. So how did you organize this book in a way where you take these big central themes like Black womanhood and motherhood, centering your own family stories and memories, and then weaving in the significance and symbolism of water, and include these tributary chapters, which are like these mini histories of notable but unsung Black women. So what was your approach to organizing all of these parts?
Yeah, I felt like there was so much that I was trying to say, and I kept thinking about collage while I was writing, and I kept thinking about jazz. And I feel like jazz and collage are essentially the same practice in different forms. And I knew that I wanted my book to be that. That was kind of my grounding anchor. I said, I know I want this to be like jazz, but how do I organize a book like jazz? And in this collage way, without confusing the reader. And I felt like the tributaries assisted with creating context around the women of my family, to basically say, hey, these are my family members, but look at these other women who are notable and unsung, as you said, who were also a part of this. I can't list them all, but here are a few that were around the same times as these women that I write about in my family. And so that was kind of a grounding practice that was really important for me, was mixing in the musicality of the Black experience, the harm, but also the joy, the legacy, the ways, the history. I feel like you just can't tell the story of Black life in a linear way. It has to be everything about even the blood of Black people in this country. It's a collage. Like everything about it is pulling from different places and cultures, and so I needed the form to also mimic the content of the people and the characters of the people. And yeah, I think that was really important. And so I tried to use water as a grounding place to come back to, because we would go in and out, kind of like a tide. We'd go far into the future and then come back into the past. And I thought, okay, one thing that can be recurring is water. And the water didn't come until later. I know you said that you're also a visual artist, and at the front of the book I have this image by Lorna Simpson called Water Bear, and I had that kind of at the top of my book proposal and also hanging on my like computer screen. And I just kept saying, this is what I'm trying to say. What this image is saying to me is what I'm trying to do in this book. And it wasn't until later that I thought, oh yeah, water is actually a great metaphor for speaking about these women, and also a metaphor for what they've carried. And there was also this video that Samuel L. Jackson was speaking to Ava DuVernay. And he said to her, thank you. Thank you for carrying all that water for us. Thank you for carrying that heavy. Thank you for carrying that weight. And I was like, yeah, you know, that's exactly right. And that's what Lorna is saying. And I just kind of was pulling from all different inspirations, but the water kept coming to me. I actually wasn't trying to chase it. It was something that when the women in my family were sharing their stories with me, there was always water. It was a metaphor, or it was present, or they were talking about their baptisms, or they were talking, everything was kind of situated around their proximity to water. And so I thought, okay, the water is definitely a part of who we are, and I have to tell the story. And when I started thinking about Black people, of course, came here via water, and Black people are heavily populated along the coastlines of the nation for different reasons. And I felt like, okay, there's something about the water that's very intrinsic to the Black experience for many different reasons. And so the water helped as a kind of grounding principle for structure, but also for how I was thinking about writing.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm also curious, are you an outline girly? Did you do a lot of timelines?
I had a very extensive proposal. I spent a lot of time on the proposal before I started writing the book. That was important mostly because I needed to sell the book without having a lot of bylines that people could access easily. So I wasn't like a staff writer somewhere. So I needed to essentially let the publishers know that I could write this thing. And also, I think for me as a first-time author, it was really helpful in organizing my mind and trying to understand what it was I was trying to say. I think I feel really grateful for the time I spent on the proposal, because once it was time to write, I just got right to it. I didn't really need to think about what I was doing. But of course, as I started writing, the book started taking on its own different shapes. Certain things came forward, certain things had to come out. I really wanted to write about Afeni Shakur. I still think about her a lot. I wanted to write about Oprah. I wanted to, and her kind of, she became a kind of mother to everyone in the nation, and why she was able to do that, how she was able to do it. There was this video I saw where she says that she felt like who she is today, if she was to start her show today, she doesn't think it would be successful. And also she said she understands that the way that she looked helped her to be successful. And I think that has a lot to do with a kind of image that America has about the Black woman and her fitting into it. So that ended up having to be taken out. A lot of things on the cutting room floor. I actually met Rakia Clark, who was at the time at Beacon Press. And she messaged me after the Camille Billups story came out in 2019 that I wrote. And we started communicating and talking. And I actually messaged her and said, hey, I'm really stuck. Can you help me understand the best way to structure this book? And she got back to me right away. And she's at Mariner now. And she got back to me right away and said, you need to divide it into 3 parts. And I was like, that's brilliant, of course. Like, I was so stuck on how to do this division of these people. And she got right back to me, and I did that, and I felt like that was really helpful, and I followed that through.
When did you decide to pursue this book?
I started writing about my grandmother when I was in my MFA program. It was not this book, but it was writing about her story, which I thought was just fascinating. And it wasn't until later that I was going to write a collection of essays about Black womanhood in America. I just felt like there were so many things I'd read that were getting at what I wanted to talk about, but I hadn't read a book about what I wanted to write about, which was Black womanhood. And when I started writing, I was like, I don't want to write about motherhood. Why do I keep being pulled back to motherhood in my research? And as I kept digging, it was like, oh, this was the role of Black women historically in the nation. And that's why I couldn't get away from it, even though I really tried. I did not want to make that connection because it felt like a stereotype or something. But I was able to kind of tease out why that exists within the book. And I think that became really important. That was not a plan. That was not a part of the plan, but it's something that developed kind of organically through the research.
So, I mean, as you're even speaking about how the book came together, it is sounding more and more like jazz even before you put words to the page.
Right. Thank you. I love jazz. What a beautiful, I mean, it's like the most perfect embodiment of the Black experience. Okay. It does everything. I love it so much.
And the foundation of a lot of other music genres, right?
Totally.
And so now I'm curious what kind of jazz you were listening to as you wrote the book, if you listened to jazz while you were writing.
I listen to a lot of jazz. I listen to a lot of classical, a lot of music that doesn't have words. I'm not a jazz connoisseur. I like what I like, and I can't tell you anything about who it is. But I have a friend named Femi who started NTS Radio in London. And I was talking to him about my relationship with jazz and how much I love it, but I don't know. I was like, who should I listen to? This is kind of, what should I do? And so he just started sending me playlists of a lot of kind of obscure jazz musicians, smaller, larger, like a lot of Miles Davis, but also like Don Cherry and like also Japanese jazz. And he was actually kind of curating for me the music that I would listen to kind of on loop. So that was incredible.
Nice. And earlier you mentioned artist Lorna Simpson and the image of hers that you included the book. Even before I read the book, when I learned of the title of your book, I immediately thought of Lorna Simpson's photograph, The Water Bearer, and Lorna Simpson being the conceptual photographer, painter, collage artist. And so the image itself is of the back of a Black woman pouring water out of a bottle and pitcher with both hands. I immediately thought about that image when I read the title of your book. And then as I was reading the book, the themes of water and memory emerged. It made me think of Toni Morrison when she says, all water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. Writers are like that, remembering where we were, what valley we ran through, what the banks were like, the light that was there, the route back to our original place. It is emotional memory, what the nerves and the skin remember as well as how it appeared. And so, Sasha, what was your approach to translating memory, yours and the women in your family, to the page?
I love the way you say my name. You have such a beautiful voice.
Oh, thank you. Likewise.
Thanks. You know, and in my family, we don't talk about the past, so this was incredibly radical within my family to talk about memory. I think because of a lot of trauma, a lot of memories of my family has just been blacked out. Like they don't have access to a lot of it. And then there's this respect element where you don't ask the elders about the past because you don't want them to have to relive that. I think my grandmother, Betty Jean, who I write about in the book, once she spoke to me, it allowed a kind of permission for the others. So all I had to say was, well, I interviewed Granny. And then they were like, what, really? What did she say? Like everyone, her own children had never asked her and didn't know her story. And that's not atypical. That's pretty standard practice. Because if we start talking about the past all the time, how are we going to survive today? And a part of because my grandmother had 11 children, and I spoke with all the daughters. So I didn't even speak to her sons. I didn't interview her sons. I was really wanting to get the story through the gaze of the women and the daughters. And the order in which I interviewed them was really important. Birth order to me is plays such a significant role in how we engage with the world, because we're kind of given a position that we didn't ask for. And the way we are able to situate ourselves within our family, of course, carries over into the way we engage with everyone else outside the house. And so I looked at the birth order and I thought, okay, I spoke with Granny, who's next? I started with the eldest, who is also like my grandmother's, more like her sister, because they were, that was her first child. And, the first child is always having to be a bit of a guinea pig, and she was very young when she had her. She also allowed for a kind of permission because she's quite stoic and doesn't speak very much. And then I went around my mother because I knew she would be the hardest one to speak with. So then I interviewed all her sisters, and then I came back to her because I knew that she would want to correct. And so I said, well, you don't have to speak with me, but I'm telling the story, and I've spoken with all your sisters. And she's like, what did they say? And then she's like, oh, they got it all wrong. I have to tell you what really happened. They don't even know. It was really important to think about how to organize the interviews and how to move through the family structure in a way that would allow me more openness. But then there was a kind of ancestral memory that started happening. And then I started finding ancestors. I worked with a genealogist out of Louisiana named Katie Morless Shannon, who I found through the New York Times. And maybe you read this piece. There was this piece in the New York Times about a painting where a family had painted over an enslaved child who was working for the family. And a historian noticed, and I think this was at the Met, actually. And the historian had it undid the covering to reveal the child. And they wanted to figure out who the child was. So they found this woman in Louisiana named Katie Morless Shannon, and she was a part of this article in the Times. And I thought, I need her help, because Louisiana is a really hard state to do archival research. And you need someone that's already in there and knows about the system and how to move around it. And so we worked together, and she actually helped me to reveal a lot of my ancestors. A lot of them, she was like, I'm so sorry, I cannot find these people. She was able to identify this boy in the painting, his age, what ship he came on, what family purchased him, and then when he died, which is like all from the painting is incredible. And then there were some dead ends that felt so heartbreaking to just say, I'm sorry, I can't find out where you came from, which was really hard. I was like, oh, okay. And also the pushback that she received and that I received in trying to contact and get certain records. There's a kind of way that people don't want you to unearth that. And I was doing some research in Galveston at the Rosenberg Library, and a woman said, why are you looking through all of this? We were good to Black people. And I'm like, you weren't even there, you weren't even, it's like she felt offended, and that she felt like she needed to be in defense of a kind of innocence, a kind of white innocence, even though I wasn't saying that she was doing it,
Right.
So that was a part of the research process too, is kind of trying to navigate and charm people and convince people to share things with me, because there's also a level of gatekeeping on the archival level that people were just not wanting to share that information.
And this leads into my question about your research overall. And your work spans essays and cultural criticism and now book writing. So how would you describe your research process for story assignments and book writing?
I like to always approach the story without an idea of what it will be. I love to leave a lot of room for the story to shape itself. So even, for example, if I'm writing criticism, if I'm interviewing or doing research, I don't want to go into it with my own idea or concept. I like for it to be kind of shaped by what I discover. So I allow a lot of space for the interviews and the research to help me build an idea of what I will write about. So that was the case for the book. I had an idea, I wrote this proposal, and then I started doing more research and interviews, and then I allow myself to be carried in the direction that the research takes me. And I'm always really grateful for that. And I think there has to be a level of trust, of certainty that it'll come. And writing this book really helped me to have faith in that. Although, even to go back to the Camille Billups story that I wrote in 2019, that story even was supposed to be a story about Emma Amos. I was writing a profile on Emma Amos, and she was already having dementia. She was suffering from dementia. And what's interesting is all she wanted to talk about was her childhood. It's like in her mother. It's so funny how the brain goes back to your childhood in these kind of regressions. And her studio manager said, you should talk to her really good friend, Camille Billups. She knows a lot. She keeps a lot of records. She has an archive in her house. You should just call her. I have her number. When I went to Camille's house, I called her and she was like, come over right away. Like, she was ready for me. And when I arrived, she had already pulled out all of these archival materials. Like, she had every invitation to Emma's shows. Not just Emma, a lot of people, but she had personal letters that Emma had written her. She had some interviews she had done. And all she wanted to talk about, though, was this daughter she had given away who had died. And I was like, kind of pushing back on it, like, okay, Miss Billups, can we get back to Emma? And then at some point I just got quiet and I listened, and it was fascinating, all of the things she was saying. And I thought, okay, this is the story. Like, this woman doesn't want to talk about Emma really anyway. And this story is so interesting. I have to follow it. So that type of thing of just like not resisting where the story is taking you, letting the story carry you where it needs to be. And whenever I'm trying to force a story, which I have to do sometimes because I have a deadline and I need to finish this piece that I've been commissioned for, it's never good. I never feel good about those stories. I don't feel I've really connected with something if I'm forcing it.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm just going to offer a little context around artist Camille Billups, who appears in your book. And you mentioned the story that you wrote about her art and her giving up her daughter in 2019 for the now shuttered digital platform Topic, RIP. The piece is titled The Artist Who Gave Up Her Daughter. What was your decision making in including Camille in the book? I'm curious how her story helped shape the memoir.
Camille didn't just shape the book. Camille shaped me as a writer. My time with her changed me. She was telling me her story, which was that she had left LA, she wanted to be an artist, she had to give up her daughter to do that, and she knew she had to succeed because she had already made the ultimate sacrifice. She gave up her daughter when her daughter was 4, so she wasn't a baby. And she had to live with that guilt. She accepted that, but she was driven by this idea that I have to succeed. I have already given up too much and I have to make this work. And when she was telling me her story, she was also kind of coaching me in a way, constantly telling me I need to do whatever it is I want to do. I need to work with my friends. I need to not depend on institutions because they are in and out of caring about Blackness. Blackness can be hot one minute and not the next. So you need to create your own way of being able to share your work even when institutions are not interested in Black stories or Black art. She was very much like, do it yourself. You want to make a film and you don't know how to edit, learn how to edit. She was kind of coaching me, and I've carried that with me in every way. Even in speaking, she would tell me about her relationship with Jim, her husband, and how what she loved most about him was that he always said, yes, you can do it. Anything's possible. Like, of course you can, which is not something, as a Black woman, you kind of need to be reassured all the time. Even if you have done something really successful, you need to have someone behind you saying, yeah, you can do this other thing too. I've even carried that. Like when I'm dating people, I'm like looking for that, you know? Mm-hmm. So I think she really kind of gave me a permission and told me that my story was valid and worth telling. And also she was like, what are you doing interviewing all these people? What's your story? Like that, you know, and she was like always cursing and very kind of straightforward and blunt. And she told it exactly how it was. And actually she reminded me a lot of my grandmother, and she was born in the same year as my grandmother. And her family was from the South and had migrated to California. Mm-hmm. And I needed to include her in the book because she really, in this kind of short section about her, embodies the thesis of the book, which is that you cannot judge a woman based off of how she decides to live if she decides to mother, especially a Black woman who is put into this confining space of always needing to be in service to other people. And her making the decision not to do that was kind of this similar to my grandmother, who decided I'm going to have 11 kids by myself and be a single mom, and that's where I'm going to find my power. She's the other side of the same type of mentality that says, I actually am not going to be a mother. I choose not to be a mom. Even though I've given birth, I'm making this decision for me, and that's how I'm going to actually tap into my power. Mm-hmm. So the entire book is really about these kind of unruly women, these wayward women who make and decide how they're going to build their lives because they know that they have to be the ones to live with the consequences. Mm-hmm. So why not live it how they choose to? Because there's no medal or award at the end of a Black woman's life. Mm-hmm. So you have to do it the way you want, because there's no applause at the end for whatever decision you make. Respectability politics, yeah, let's say you do that. At the end, what do you have? Nothing but shame.
There's no champagne toast.
No. So do it your way.
Right. Yeah, because even respectability politics will not save you, right?
No. And that's a big part of a reoccurring theme of these women in the book, like, for example, Fred Hampton's mother, mm-hmm. Iberia, and Betty Davis, the funk musician. Mm-hmm. She understood that, you know, and there are consequences to that, but you chose, so.
And that autonomy is so powerful. When I was reading The Water Bearers, what was really coming through for me was like your writing, it has this incisiveness to it when you're describing the interiority and the choices of your grandmother Betty Jean's life and her girls, your aunts, and your mother Connie. There's also something that you said a little bit a while ago when you mentioned working with the genealogist and how it can be heartbreaking when you can't find certain details, when there are question marks. And so with your book, you write with incisiveness, but you also leave room for these like contemplative questioning when exact details of a life aren't available to you. How much did you rely on the material, like your interviews, family albums, the archive, and how much did you lean into your instinct and imagination to help the reader crystallize the fullness of the lives that you're writing about in the book?
There's a lot of that. I mean, I can't say exactly. The materials were really helpful. I mean, maybe it was both, because I would have some materials, but then there'd be this gaping hole where I'd need to kind of imagine how to bridge that. And I think that Sadia Hartman's Wayward Lives and Hilton Al's White Girls they're both kind of these texts I go back to all the time for a kind of reminder that it is imperative. It's necessary if you're going to write about anything around Black history, anything around a Black life. I mean, because the idea of having archival materials about your life is such a privilege. Like, I was speaking with this Brazilian filmmaker, and she was saying, you know, I have no photos of myself as a child. I have no photos of my upbringing, and I have no photos of my mother's upbringing. It's like we just didn't exist. And I also don't have any photos of my mother as a child. I don't have a single photo of my grandmother as a child. It's such a luxury and a privilege to have evidence of your being here. And I think my grandmother's evidence of being became her children. That's her evidence that she was here. And so we don't always have the privilege of record. A lot of times when you're living in precarity, your housing is unstable. So how are you going to have, for example, the report card from kindergarten, you know? Like my mother, because she didn't have all that, my parents held on to everything that I ever made, took a photo, everything. But what a gift and what a luxury to have that. And so the idea is that a Black life isn't worth remembering. You know, in the archives, in Louisiana, they digitized only property records. But Black people were considered property, but then they decided when they did the digitization that they would only do real estate and not humans. So they just completely, and then whatever wasn't digitized was lost. So it's like all these lives erased. And something else that I encountered were families who held private records of their estates, of these plantations, and they didn't want to share them, and they are not required to because they don't want to be connected to that past. Which is like another kind of violence. And so I did a lot. I had to imagine within the gaps a lot, and I had to use my intuition, and I had to like allow for spiritual guidance.
And one of the characters in your book is place. I'm thinking about 5010. And in the Water Bearers, your grandmother Betty Jean's house, which you all call 5010, it's an important part of the book, and it holds so many memories. And it's a place that you say everybody has paid for in some way. What was your approach in making 5010 a character in this memoir?
In a practical sense, the reason I needed to include it is because I had so many characters. There's 11 children. There's me. I mean, all those children have children. So you can imagine, like, we have so many cousins. My cousins are like my siblings. Like, we grew up together at this house. And I needed a place where everyone could be in one room, you know? I think in telling any story, whether it's in film or writing, you need a place. Like, you know, Seinfeld had a place, Friends had a place. There always needs to be a place where all the characters can be in one setting. And then the main characters can kind of exist outside of that. And so I thought I would place them there. But then as I started situating them, I really got into writing about the house, which I love to write about locations. For me, I get really excited when I'm reading things like this, but also in writing. And the house, as I started writing and thinking about it, you know, when you spend time at a place, you just kind of, you don't see it. It's so much, it's like an extension of your own skin. Like, you don't see it. And when I sat to think about it and really say, okay, what is 5010? What does it represent? What does it feel like? What does it look like? I was like, oh, wow, this is so rich. I'm having so much fun. So I had a lot of fun in writing about the house as a character. But the house, and the more I thought about it, it's been a character in our family. It's our gathering place. And I didn't even really identify the significance of the house until I was writing about it. I was like, oh, this is so beautiful. This is so important. Physical space is really important for this family, but also I think specifically for people who lack a kind of origin, to have a place that they can ground themselves in. And so in a place to gather, and a place where you can always go, what a gift. And so I had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading it, and it's a reoccurring character. You don't just say 50-10 for one chapter. It's throughout the book. And there were parts of it where I felt that I was right there with the family as well. I want to go back to when you were talking about interviewing your aunts, your mother and your grandmother, and then the transparency and honesty that came out of those conversations. When I grew up, and I'm sure you can relate, I was taught that you don't tell family business. And so, Sasha, you got a whole book with family business in it. So what was your thinking and your approach in telling these hard truths and the joys in this memoir, while also honoring the privacy of the women in your family?
Yeah, you definitely don't tell family business. Like, you get that little chat right before you walk in any place. Like, don't say anything, don't talk about anything. Hilton Als has become a really wonderful kind of mentor to me. And he is constantly telling me that I have a responsibility to the truth, even if it maybe doesn't make people feel so good. Someone needs to read it, and that is your job as the writer to make sure that the people who need it get what they need. And for me, as a reader growing up, when I read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, wow, like, I remember it. I've read it many times since then, but when I first read it, I was a teenager, and that book really kind of broke me open. I mean, it's not that we had similar stories, but it was that I identified with the characters in the story. They were familiar to me. And I think I was able to identify with Maya Angelou, her character within the book, her thinking and the kind of silly ways that children think about things, and then kind of wanting to do something different. And so that reading, the reading that I've done in the past, plus Hilton saying what he says to me often as a reminder, I think gave me the courage to speak honestly, not just about my aunts and my grandmother and my mom, but also about myself. That was maybe the hardest part, is to, like, I felt like if you're going to talk about your aunts and your mom, you have to come with your story with the same kind of rigor and truth and commitment to honesty. And that was not easy, of course, but there's this way that I feel the women in my family have struggled with the way that I wrote about, the way that I analyzed what they shared with me. So there's the story they shared, but even the story they shared, it's hard to read what someone perceived from what you said. For my mother, it's been a challenge in many ways. She's a striver. And when you're a striver, all you want people to talk about are your accomplishments and what you've overcome. But I feel like it's important to talk about that shadow part, that part that's not as easy, because that's where the richness is, actually, in those complicated parts, because they give context to the triumph. Without the context, why do I care about the triumph? Not that everyone needs to go through pain in order to experience joy or success, but that you need the context within the story. I was just watching last night one battle after another, and I thought at the end, I said, yeah, there was success, but I don't care. Like, I don't really understand the context. So every success that was in the movie, I didn't have a thrilling feeling in my body because I didn't really understand where all of this was coming from. And I feel like all good stories, what makes them good for me is providing the context that exists around the characters. And that's why the historical elements are so important to framing these women. Their stories alone, just on a page, doesn't mean anything if you don't understand what's going on around them in the country they live in, and what's the history of the country that they live in. And so I think both are informing each other.
Now I'd love to turn the floor over to you and have you read a part of the book. I'd love for you to read the prelude. The reason why I'd love for you to read this is it reads like a poem. It's very direct and poignant, and it starts with the word listen, period. That's it, one word. And period. And it grabs my attention, but it also reminds me of one of my favorite poets, Lucille Clifton. She has a poem, What the Mirror Said, and she starts with the word listen. And so you grab my attention with that one word alone. And then your voice shifts for the rest of the book, and yet it's still very much cohesive. So first off, why was it important that you begin the book this way?
I wanted to define water bearer from the beginning. I just wanted to have a kind of definition of what even it is. And when I wrote it, I was kind of writing it for myself. Like, what even is this water bearer? And I had already finished the first draft of the book before I wrote that. So that was one of the last things to be written. And I still felt like, how am I going to start this thing? Initially, I was like, I'll start the book at 50-10. And that just felt like, I don't know. Because what is this book even? If someone opens this book, are they just going to be thrown into a living room? Which I love when books do that. But I felt like with the title, I needed to define something to give an idea to the reader about what exactly they were diving into. And I wrote this in like one setting. I just was like, I wrote this, I sent it to a friend, and she was like, yes. My editor, John Friedman, was like, no. And he was like, this voice is too different. Like the reader who picks up your book at a bookstore is going to read this and they're going to think that this is what the book is like, and it's not. And I thought, yeah, you're right. It is different from the rest of the voice in the book. But I thought maybe they'll keep reading. Maybe they'll read like the very next line that kind of goes into my grandmother. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just needed to get that out. And once I did, I thought I needed to start the book with that frame just to give a kind of quick summary of what a water bearer is. And then everything else that comes after it is deepening that definition that I provided on the first page.
Okay. Well, without further ado,
I'll go ahead and read it. Thank you for choosing that part. Prelude. Listen. When I say water bearer, I mean carrying all that weight. With callous hands, dry mouth, split ends, and a back that don't bend except to pray. I'm talking about balance, flat-footed strides, grounded so deep into the earth, look like she's sinking when she actually sprouting. 'Cause she's of it. Sure of a path nobody but God can see. I'm talking about no map, no paving, no clue where to find it, but somehow she's gonna get it. I'm talking sweat above her lip and mud beneath her nails. You know who I'm talking about. Big Mama Nem, Grandmama Nem, Mother Dear, Granny, Nan, Buela, Tea Lady, Meemaw, Mommy, Mother. Your nanny, your mammy, your punching bag, your liberator, your organizer, your siren, grantor of your manhood, affirmer of your masculinity. The soft, warm, pink place for you to deposit your darkness. Go in broken and come out whole. When I say water, I mean life force. I mean ancestral inheritance. The water of the womb. All that mama tried to shield you from, but you got it honest. I mean bloodline. All that she dare not say and you bet not ask came to you through that water. Water so pure it don't tell no lies. That water damn near broke her back, but she died before she let somebody take what belongs to her. The water's all she has to call her own, and she'll give it all to you and won't even burden you with the tale of how she made it across the valley. Not nobody can imagine what she saw, what she felt, what she stepped on and over to get there. Feet so swole look like they might bust, hardened souls tender to the touch, still sensitive enough to feel moisture's gesture, subtle as a whisper, certain as forsythia. Before you can even smack your lips and suck your tongue, she's already at the mouth of the river. She's carrying all that heavy, parsing out what you need from what you thought you wanted, taking a whole bunch of nothing and making it enough. All you gotta do is trust her with your whole throat when you lean your head back and open up wide. And then maybe, if you live long enough, one day, on an ordinary day, after all those yesterdays, you yourself will try to find your way to that well, to that river, to that delta. And only then will you be able to look to her and ask, Mama, are you thirsty?
Thank you, Sasha. Gorgeous writing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I have to follow up with a question about when you went to your editor and you were like, hey, I know the draft is in, but I got this. We gotta include this. And your editor was not with it. How did you negotiate to get the prelude into the book?
You know, I just felt so strongly about it. I was like, sorry. And me and my editor have such a wonderful relationship, and he usually doesn't push back on me so much when I feel adamant. But on this, he was like, Sasha, come on, like, let's just throw the people in, like, let's throw them into the deep end in the book. And I love that when books do that. So I knew what he was saying. And he was like, it's audacious. Like, when you just throw a reader in, it's really powerful. And I agree, but I was like, I don't know, this means something. In the way that I think it's partially how it came to me, in this kind of what felt like it was coming through me. Mm-hmm. All at once. I was like, what even is this? Like, it just flowed. And when things come to me in that way, I feel really strongly about them. Not that they can't be edited, but that they need to be included, because I do have a kind of really spiritual practice with writing where it's like sometimes something will wake me up. And this was one of those moments that woke me up. And I thought I have to honor whatever this was that came through. And you know, sometimes you have these things come through and they get past you. They kind of slip through your fingers. And then sometimes you can grab them. And this was one of those moments where something came through and I needed to, and I was able to grab it. And I felt, you know, that it was necessary. Mm-hmm. And so he said, okay. And then there were some other people at Canova that were like, yeah, we love this. And so he was like, fine, keep it.
Good call, Sasha. And I love how even as you're describing this, you're very much describing water when you say things that are passing through that you can't necessarily hold, but then there's some of it that you can hold. And this was the water to hold.
I love that, Christina.
And you, I think in a previous interview, you mentioned something about your desk being almost like an altar. And so if you could describe your writing space for this book and how it helped usher in this book.
The writing space was really important, actually. I used to write at home. I have a daughter. When I started writing this book, she was starting middle school. So the worst time of maybe everyone's life, maybe people are never meaner in their whole lifetimes than when they're in middle school. It was just after the pandemic, and I was like, I just need a place of my own. Very Virginia Woolf. I needed a room of my own. And because it was post-pandemic, so many office buildings were empty. And so I was able to find something really inexpensive in Manhattan. And I was like, okay, I need this. And it wasn't until I moved in that I realized, oh, this is the first place I've had of my own in the past 15 years since I had my daughter. And so it was small. I painted it pink. I called it the writer's womb. It was like this little place that held me. And I set up an altar with all these women I was writing about, ancestors, but also all of these women and writers that like James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, W.E.B. Du Bois. Like, it was all of these people before me who have kind of paved the way. And I just put them all on this altar, and I would sit, that's where I would start my day. I would start my day at the altar and kind of say, okay, I'm here. Please guide me. Give me the courage to go where you asked me to go. Give me the courage to say the truth. And, you know, kind of expressing my gratitude to them. Mm-hmm. for doing what they did, for allowing me the space. And I kind of started with this same kind of chant meditation every morning to ground myself and to remind myself that I'm a part of a lineage of people who have been practicing this craft. I'm grateful to be called upon. What an honor to be able to be an artist. And also a reminder to myself that I am an artist and that there is a spiritual element to what I'm doing. I'm not a journalist in a kind of typical sense. And so that always kind of helped me to get going. And I needed this kind of routine as well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that ritual. And I want to go back to your grandmother and ask you, when's the last time you felt Betty Jean's presence, and how did she let you know it was her?
That's such a good question. I felt her in the room when I was in Houston on the book tour. All of her daughters were there, and they came from all over. Mm-hmm. And before we started the talk, we kind of summoned her. I think we all felt her there. We were all crying, all of her daughters and me. There was this movement in the room, and I felt that the support, the embrace of her there, because I was really like, my books come out and my grandmother won't be at my book tour. This is like, that was the saddest part about losing her while I was writing the book. But I also feel like I felt her guidance more even because of that. But she was there that day. I could feel her there that day. I think we all did. And it was this way that she kind of brought us all together. And that has not been easy since her passing. Like, we do not get together in the same way. I have not been to 5010 since she passed. It's like impossible for me. Every time I kind of drive that way when I'm visiting, I turn around. Like, I can't even do it. So the idea that we were all there and like she was with us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. And I want to end our conversation with the actual end of your book. You included one of your collages titled "Water is a Body Too." It's black and white in the book, but you feature it on your website in color. And so I would love for you to describe to listeners this collage and tell us how and why you created it.
I'd written this piece for the Paris Review about Lorna Simpson and Breonna Taylor. And I had started collaging with my daughter during the pandemic. And so that was on my mind. And Leslie Jameson from Columbia University read that piece and contacted me and asked me to do an online guided workshop about collaging and its relationship to writing. Mm-hmm. And during that, I had to create a collage too. So this is during the pandemic, everything's on Zoom. So I'm creating this collage for this workshop that I'm guiding. And I ended up just loving it, and I just held on to it. I framed it, I named it, and I actually wanted to name the book Water is a Body Too. That was the original title that I had on my proposal and everything. The title of the book came it was like weeks before it was time to go to print. Like, the book title was a fight because they thought that Water is a Body Too wasn't big enough for how big the book felt. But that collage was created during that workshop at Columbia with Leslie Jameson, and I just loved it. And I had it also on my draft I thought maybe it could even be used for the cover of the book. I just thought it was symbolic to what we were creating with the book. So I wanted it to be included in the end, just as a testament to the entire process, to the women, to the bayous. Like, the back of the collage, the backdrop of the collage is a lot of the bayou topography of Houston. And then there's like my mom, my grandmother, my dad, my mother's grandmother who raised her, and her sister are like holding hands on the collage. And it's, I don't know, they're holding hands in this photo like girls, and they're like 80 and 90 years old. Mm-hmm. and they're holding. I just felt like it was so beautiful. And then I kind of placed them within the topography of Houston with the bayous, where they're from, where they're born, where they're bred, and where they return to.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so much story there and so much tenderness too. So Sasha, thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast, and congrats again on the book.
Thank you, Christina. What a fantastic conversation. Thank you. I'm grateful for you.
Likewise. Thank you, Sasha.
Thanks again to Sasha and Christina, and thanks to all of you for listening. If you like what we're doing with Nieman Storyboard, leave us a written review and a rating in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also share this podcast with a friend. We'll see you soon.